Somewhere in a museum case sits a suit of bronze armor that should not exist. Not yet, anyway. It covers a man from his neck to his knees, plate over plate, hammered and shaped by hands that had no business being this good at metalwork. And it's dated to around 1450 BC. That's not a typo. That's over 3,000 years before a medieval knight ever pulled on a breastplate. The strange part isn't just that it exists. It's that almost everything the world thinks it knows about Greek armor, the red cape, the exposed chest, the leather skirt from every movie poster, has almost nothing to do with it, or with most of the 2,000 years of Greek history that followed. So here's the real question worth asking. If the Greeks had this kind of sophistication so early, why does their armor keep disappearing and reinventing itself, generation after generation, almost like the culture itself kept getting knocked down and had to climb back up from nothing? Start with the man wearing that bronze suit. He's a Mycenaean warlord, and everything about him tells a story of connection. A tunic cut in a style borrowed from trade partners across the Near East, boots suited for long campaigns, and that full-body bronze panoply laced together piece by piece. On his head sits something even stranger, a helmet built from the tusks of at least 10 wild boars, sewn onto a leather cap. Homer wrote about this exact helmet centuries after it had gone out of use, and archaeologists later dug up the real thing and confirmed he wasn't exaggerating. This warrior carries an ox-hide-faced tower shield without a proper hand grip, a long bronze thrusting spear, and a narrow backup sword. It is, without question, more advanced protective equipment than Greek soldiers would wear again for the next 1,000 years. And that's the twist nobody expects. Greek armor didn't gradually improve over time. It peaked absurdly early. Then it fell off a cliff. Around 1200 BC, that entire world burned. Not metaphorically, the palaces themselves were destroyed, one after another, across the Mediterranean. Writing disappeared. Bronze-working know-how disappeared. Historians call what came next the Greek Dark Ages. And it's one of the least understood stretches in the whole story, mostly because so little evidence survived it. The warriors who emerge from this period barely wear anything at all. A shield, an iron sword, a spear, maybe nothing more. What art does survive from these centuries hints at frequent close-range sword fighting, which suggests this stripped-down warfare may have been far more brutal, man-to-man, than anything the heavily armored Mycenaeans ever experienced. The lesson buried in this collapse is simple and unsettling. Sophistication is not permanent. It can vanish in a generation, and it takes centuries to claw back. It did claw back, just not through kings this time. Around 720 BC, heavy armor returns to Greece, but on the backs of farmers who bought their own equipment. This is the birth of the hoplite, the citizen soldier, and his gear is a strange mix of function and spectacle. A simple tunic underneath a genuinely expensive suit of bronze plate that would have made an ordinary farmer look like a walking bronze statue on the battlefield. He carries 2 spears at first, one for throwing, one for thrusting, though that practice fades out not long after the Persian Wars. His Corinthian helmet is the image everyone pictures when they hear the word Greek soldier, and it's iconic for a reason, even though the man wearing it could barely see or hear anything happening around him. But the real genius isn't the helmet. It's the shield. The aspis is curved and positioned so its right edge protects the unarmored side of the man standing next to you. On its own, it's nearly useless. In a tight formation, it turns a wall of individuals into a single organism. For 200 years, that shield wall crushed nearly everything in its path, including, against absurd odds, a Persian army at Marathon and again at Plataea. But the phalanx's most famous stand wasn't won by the men history remembers best. At Thermopylae, the soldiers who stayed behind with the Spartans when everyone else withdrew were the Thespians. Roughly 700 of them. And roughly 700 who never went home. Popular memory has erased them almost entirely in favor of 300 Spartans, but the archaeological and historical record insists they were there. Standard hoplite gear, shield marked with a crescent symbol tied to their home city. And speaking of the Spartans, the image most people carry of them is almost entirely wrong for most of their actual history. By the time of the Peloponnesian War, many Spartan hoplites are recorded wearing shockingly little armor, which should force a rethink of how this supposedly rigid warrior society actually fought. The helmet associated with them today wasn't uniquely theirs. Even the lambda symbol on their shields, the one modern audiences treat as eternal Spartan branding, didn't appear until surprisingly late in their history. Strip away the myth, and what's left is a system, not a costume. Boys entering brutal training at age 7, a citizen warrior class that peaked at around 9,000 men and had collapsed to under a tenth of that within a couple of centuries. That collapse mattered because it opened the door for someone else to rewrite the rules entirely. At Leuctra in 371 BC, Theban forces broke Spartan dominance not through new technology, but through a new idea, stacking their formation absurdly deep on one wing instead of spreading evenly, concentrating force where it mattered most. It proved that the old hoplite system could be beaten by rethinking geometry alone. But an even bigger threat to the phalanx came from the opposite direction. Soldiers who barely fought like hoplites at all. At Lechaeum in 390 BC, lightly equipped troops harassed a column of Spartan hoplites from a distance, pulling back whenever the heavy infantry tried to charge, and inflicted losses in the hundreds before the Spartans could ever close the distance. It was the first recorded time light infantry had unraveled a hoplite formation in the open, and it proved that heavier wasn't always better. Two separate lessons: deeper formations can break a phalanx, and flexible troops can outmaneuver one, were about to be combined by a king who had grown up watching both happen. Alexander's Macedonian system took the phalanx's raw power and finally gave it flexibility. His elite hypaspists weren't pikemen like the rest of his infantry. They fought more like traditional hoplites, but with far more mobility, acting as the hinge between the rigid pike wall and the fast-moving cavalry on the flank. At Gaugamela, a Macedonian force of roughly 47,000 men defeated a Persian army that outnumbered them at least 2-1, largely because that hinge held. Alexander's other elite unit, the so-called Silver Shields, carried that reputation through decades of brutal wars among his successors after his death, until, in one of history's stranger footnotes, they surrendered their own commanding officer just to recover their captured baggage train. Loyalty, it turned out, had its price. Without Alexander holding the whole system together, his successors kept the parts they understood, the pike phalanx, and let the flexibility die out. New troop types emerged to patch the gaps, including soldiers carrying a shield style possibly borrowed from Celtic invaders who swept into Greece in the 3rd century BC, blending pike-era discipline with skirmisher-style mobility. Some commanders even tried copying Rome's system outright, though the historical record for these imitation legionaries is so thin that some historians doubt the unit type existed in any organized way at all. What's not in doubt is what happened next. At Cynocephalae and later at Pydna, Roman legions tore the Macedonian phalanx apart, not through superior bravery, but because the pike wall needed flat, open ground to function, and the legion did not. By 146 BC, Greece was a Roman province, and the independent Greek way of war was over. But the soldiers themselves didn't vanish, they scattered, and their traditions kept mutating in places far from the Aegean. Along the Black Sea, Greek heavy infantry may have blended with Eastern archery traditions under regional rulers, though evidence here is thin. Thousands of kilometers away, in the Indo-Greek kingdoms of Central and South Asia, royal guardsmen combined Greek military organization with Indian artistic and religious traditions. Scale armor instead of the old muscle cuirass, shields decorated with Buddhist symbolism, evidence surviving mostly through coinage and later statuary. Back in the Mediterranean, Greek military identity survived by folding into Rome itself. Spartan units reportedly served under the Emperor Caracalla, though most historians now believe these were conventional Roman legionary formations, dressed up with a legendary name for morale and propaganda value. The independent Greek soldier was gone, but the tradition wasn't finished evolving. Centuries later, Byzantine military manuals, like Emperor Maurice's Strategicon, describe a heavy infantryman built almost like a synthesis of everything that came before him: conical helmet, layered armor, oval shield, spear and sword together. And the Empire's ultimate weapon brings the story full circle in a way that feels almost too poetic to be true. The cataphract, a heavily armored horseman on an armored horse, carrying lance, bow, mace, and sword all at once. Under commanders like Nikephoros Phocas, wedges of these riders dominated entire battlefields through sheer weight of metal, funded, trained, and equipped by a centralized state, not unlike the palace-backed warlords of the Bronze Age, nearly 2,000 years earlier. Add in Byzantine incendiary weapons and the famous axe-wielding Norse and Anglo-Saxon mercenaries who guarded the emperor personally, and you have a military tradition that had, in a strange way, arrived back almost exactly where it started. It finally ended on May 29, 1453, when Constantinople fell, and the last true heir of Greek military tradition went down with it. 2,600 years. And the pattern never really broke. Every collapse stripped the Greek soldier down to almost nothing, and every rebuilding made him into something nobody would have predicted. So maybe the real mystery isn't which era had the best Greek armor. It's why a civilization that kept losing everything, its palaces, its writing, its independence, never once lost the will to rebuild its warriors from the ground up. If you had to guess which collapse comes next for any civilization, and what rises from it afterward, where would you even start looking? Let us know what era you'd want us to go deeper on next, and subscribe if you want to be here when we do.